Tonight, a quiet story from a hillside of old grapevines above a small village. Long ago, about the warm evening at the end of the harvest, when the last grapes come in and the whole village sits down together to one long table under the leaves. The sun was going down gold behind the far hills, and on Tommaso's hillside, the last of the grapes were coming in. All down the long rows of vines, the pickers worked in the low amber light, bent to the heavy bunches, cutting them and laying them in the deep baskets, and their voices carried easy and tired across the slope. A word, a laugh, a song half sung and let go. It had been a long, warm week of this, the whole village out on the hill from first light. And now it was nearly done. Just these last rows, and the harvest would be in. Tommaso worked the top row himself, the way he always had. He was old now, and slow, but his hands knew the vines better than his eyes did. They found the ripe bunches in the leaves without looking, cut them clean, and laid them down. And the vines were his, every one, planted and tended over a long life, so that walking the rows was a little like walking back through his own years. His hands were stained deep purple to the wrist with the day's grapes. He did not mind it. They had been stained purple every autumn of his life, and washed clean every autumn after, and would be again. Below him on the slope, his grandson Nico worked a basket of his own. The boy was 11, and this was the first year he had been let to carry the full baskets down with the men, instead of just gathering the fallen grapes in a little one, and he was working hard and trying not to show how heavy they were. Tommaso watched him heave a full basket up onto his hip and stagger a step and steady it and say nothing and go on. And the old man smiled to himself and did not help him, because some things a boy wants to do himself. The light was going. The crickets were starting up in the warm grass. Down in the village, the first lamps were being lit. Tommaso cut the last bunch from the last vine of his row and laid it in the basket and straightened his old back and looked down the hill at the day ending and thought, the last of it now, and then the table. Then came the carrying down. The full baskets were heavy as a small child, and the hillside was steep and cut into terraces. And the way down to the yard was a worn path the pickers had trodden for hundreds of years, winding between the dry stone walls that held the slope. The old grey donkey did most of it, patient as the hill itself. 2 great baskets slung either side of her, plodding down with her ears swinging, knowing the path so well she could have walked it asleep. But the people carried the rest themselves, on hip and shoulder, down through the warm blue dusk. The day's picking going down to the press. Nico carried his own. He got the full basket up onto his shoulder, the way he had seen the men do it, and set off down the path after the others. Slow and careful, his arms burning and his legs not quite sure, the weight of all those grapes pressing down on him. And he carried it the whole way, the whole long way down, and did not set it down once to rest, though he wanted to. At the bottom, he swung it down off his shoulder into the yard with the rest, and stood up, and his arms were shaking and light now without it, and his hands were as purple as his grandfather's. He had carried his share. No one made a fuss of it, but Tommaso, coming down behind him, laid a hand on the boy's head as he passed, just for a moment, and that was enough. And then the last basket came down, the donkey bringing it, the very last of the grapes off the hill. And someone called out softly that that was the last of them, and it was set down in the yard with all the others, and the picking was done. The whole hillside picked clean. A year's grapes in. The warm slope standing empty now in the last of the light. The pickers stood a moment in the yard, tired and easy, brushing the leaves off their arms, and the crickets sang, and the day's work was finished. Now the rest of it. Now the press and the table. In the corner of the yard stood the old stone press, worn smooth and dark by 100 years of use, and now they began to fill it. The first baskets were tipped in, the dark grapes heaped up shining, and the great wooden screw was set to turn, and two of the men leaned on the long bar and walked it slowly round, and the press came down on the fruit with a slow groan, and the juice began to run. It ran out of the stone lip in a thin, sweet stream, pale red gold and cloudy, into the waiting tub, the first juice of the year, the first of all of it. And the smell of it came up into the warm evening, the sharp, sweet smell of crushed grapes that meant, on this one evening every year, that the harvest was truly in. The children gathered to watch it run, the way children always do. The men leaned on the bar and walked it round, slow and easy, in no hurry now. And the juice ran and ran, sweet and new, into the tub. Tommaso took a plain clay jug and held it under the stone lip and let it fill with the first of the new juice, the very first of the pressing, the freshest and the sweetest, cloudy and pale, and still almost warm from the sun that had been in the grapes all day. This was for the table. This was always for the table. He had filled this same jug from this same press every autumn for longer than he could rightly remember. His father before him, and his before that. And he filled it now with his purple hands and held it careful so as not to spill the first of it, and carried it across the yard and up toward the vines, where the lamps were lit, and the long table was waiting. Behind him the press groaned softly, and the juice ran on, and the sweet smell of the crushed grapes hung over the whole yard, and the first stars were coming out over the hill. Up above the yard, on the flat ground beneath the old vines, the long table was laid and waiting. All through the afternoon, while the others picked, Lena and the women of the village had been making it ready, carrying out the long boards and setting them up end to end into one table, longer than any house could hold, long enough for the whole village, spreading the white cloths down its length, and stringing the oil lamps up through the leafy roof of vines overhead, so that now, in the blue dark, The whole long table stood glowing softly gold beneath a ceiling of vine leaves. The warm light coming down through the leaves, and the moths turning slow around the lamps. And it was loaded. Down the whole length of it stood the food of the day's end. The flat, round loaves of new bread, still warm, torn, and not cut. The green gold new oil in shallow dishes to dip the bread in. The cheese, and the olives, and the late tomatoes. The cold meat, and the figs split open, sweet and red. Plain food, the food of the place, but a great deal of it, set out all down the middle of the table to be reached for and shared. No one waited on, everyone helping themselves and each other. And now the tired pickers came up from the yard to it. They washed the day off their hands first, at the stone water trough by the wall, though the purple of the grapes did not really wash off. Not tonight. It had gone too deep, and they came to the long table in the lamplight. The whole village, old and young, the grandmothers and the babies and the men with their aching backs, and the children half asleep on their feet. And they found places along the benches, anywhere, next to anyone, and sat down. And the sitting down, after the long day on their feet, was its own deep pleasure. You could see it go through them as they took their places, the whole village easing down together onto the benches with a sound very like a sigh. Tommaso set his jug of the new juice down at the head of the table and took his place, and looked down the long, glowing length of it at all of them. Everyone was in. The table was full. Then Tommaso poured the first cup. He filled a plain cup with the new juice from the jug, cloudy and pale and sweet. And he made no speech, because he was not a man for speeches, and on this night none was needed. He only lifted the cup a little, to the table, to the hill, to the year, and drank a mouthful of the first of it, and passed it on. And the cup went down the long table, hand to hand, each one drinking a mouthful of the new juice and passing it to the next. The first taste of this year's grapes, the taste of the very day's work, sweet and sharp and new on every tongue, all the way down the long glowing table, from the old man at the head to the smallest child at the foot. The whole village drinking in turn from the year's first pressing. And then the jugs went round, and the cups were filled, and the bread was torn and passed, and the oil dishes pushed along, and the talk started up, low and warm and easy. The good tired talk of people who have done a hard thing together and seen it through. When the cup came to Nico, his grandfather had seen to it that the boy had a proper cup of his own this year, not watered, not a child's small sip, but a real cup of the new juice, like the men, because this year the boy had carried his share like the men. Nico drank it down, the sweet, sharp new juice, the taste of grapes his own purple hands had carried down the hill, and it was the best thing he had ever drunk in his life. He sat up a little straighter on the bench among the tired grown workers, one of them tonight, and no one said a word about it, and that was exactly how he wanted it. And the talk went round, and the bread went round, and the lamps glowed gold in the leaves above the long, full table, and down in the dark the crickets sang. And it was, Tommaso thought, looking the length of it, the same as it ever was, and as good. The evening went on, the way those evenings do, in no hurry to end. The food went slowly down. The cups were filled and filled again. The little children fell asleep where they sat, in laps and along the benches, and in the warm hollow of someone's arm, and were not moved. The talk dropped lower and slower and warmer. The long day's tiredness coming up soft and sweet in everyone now. The kind of tiredness that is all the way earned and asks for nothing but to sit still a while longer in good company. Above the table the lamps burned low and gold in the vine leaves, and beyond them the moon had come up full over the hill, silvering the empty rows of vines that had given all they had and could rest now too. The crickets that had sung all evening began, one by one, to wind down. Somebody told a long, slow story at the far end of the table that no one quite listened to, and everyone was glad of. Tommaso sat at the head with his purple hands easy on the cloth, and the new juice warm in him, and his whole village around him, fed and tired and content under the leaves, and there was nowhere he would rather have been. The last of the grapes were in. The first of the new juice was drunk. The work was done, and the table was full, and the night was warm. And one by one, in no hurry at all, the low voices grew fewer and softer, and the lamps burned down, and the moon climbed slow over the quiet hill. The long table glowing low and gold under the leaves. The whole village gathered and fed and easy along it. The new juice drunk, and the bread all broken. The moon high and silver over the picked clean hill. The crickets winding down, one by one, to quiet. And the old man at the head of the table, his work done, and his people around him, content to sit on in the warm dark as long as the evening would last.